Welcome to Fear Forge, the channel where we bring to life the most chilling paranormal and unexplained stories. Today, we have something special for you as we celebrate reaching over 96 subscribers. Thank you for your incredible support. To mark this milestone, we'll be diving into the terrifying history of two of the most haunted places in the United States. The Lizzie Borden House in Fall River, Massachusetts, and the Monte Vista Hotel in Flagstaff, Arizona. These locations are notorious for the dark energy that seems to linger within their walls, places where tragedy and death have left permanent scars. We'll take you on a journey through the eerie stories that still echo in these haunted halls, from the brutal murders of the Borden family to the ghostly encounters in the rooms of the Monte Vista. So, as always, grab your favorite drink, sit back, and let us transport you away from the rush of everyday life. Get ready to experience the fear, suspense, and mystery that lie just beneath the surface of these infamous haunted places. Now, let's begin with our first story, set in the chilling home of Lizzie Borden. Story 1. Daniel had always been fascinated by notorious crime scenes. It wasn't just a morbid curiosity. It was a deep-seated need to understand what drives people to commit the unspeakable. Over the years, he had visited many infamous places, but none had intrigued him quite like the Lizzie Borden House in Fall River, Massachusetts. The brutal axe murders of Andrew and Abby Borden in 1892 were some of the most infamous in American history, and although Lizzie Borden had been acquitted, her name had become synonymous with the crime. There was something about the mystery, the unresolved tension, that called out to him. He needed to see the place for himself. So, one late autumn weekend, Daniel booked a room at the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, which had been turned into a tourist attraction where guests could stay in the same rooms where the Borden family had lived and died. The owners had restored the house to look as it did in 1892, right down to the smallest detail. It was as if the house was frozen in time, an eerie monument to one of the most gruesome crimes in American history. When Daniel arrived, the air was crisp and the wind howled through the trees that surrounded the house. He checked in and was given a tour of the infamous rooms. The guide pointed out where Andrew Borden had been found on the couch, his face nearly unrecognizable from the axe wounds, and where Abby Borden had met a similar fate upstairs. Daniel listened intently, but his mind was already racing ahead. He was eager to experience the house at night, in silence, when he could feel the weight of its history. As night fell, Daniel returned to his room, which was located on the second floor, near the infamous guest room where Abby Borden had been murdered. The house was quiet, with only a few other guests staying that night. The heavy, old-fashioned furnishings and wallpaper gave the place an oppressive feeling, as if the past was constantly pressing down on the present. Daniel had planned to stay up late, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that could explain the lingering sense of dread that seemed to pervade every inch of the house. Around midnight, Daniel decided to explore the house on his own, armed with a flashlight and his phone. He carefully crept down the creaky wooden stairs to the first floor, where Andrew Borden had been murdered. The house was deathly silent, and the only sound was the soft tapping of the wind against the window panes. As he reached the living room, where Andrew's life had ended so violently, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of unease. It was as if the very air in the room had thickened, becoming almost suffocating. He stood in the middle of the room, trying to shake off the sensation. He glanced over at the couch where Andrew had been found, imagining the scene as it must have looked back in 1892. The thought sent a chill down his spine. But what unsettled him more was the feeling that he wasn't alone. He had read about hauntings before, how some people could sense a presence. Daniel had always been skeptical, but now, standing in the darkened room, he began to understand what those people meant. Then he heard it, a soft creak, like a floorboard shifting under someone's weight. It was so faint that Daniel almost convinced himself it was just the house settling. But then it came again, this time louder. His heart pounded in his chest as he slowly turned toward the sound, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. The beam of light swept across the room, landing on the staircase that led to the second floor. For a moment, everything was still, and then a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle of footsteps echoed down the stairs. Daniel's mouth went dry as he stared at the staircase, waiting for something, anything, to appear. But nothing did. The footsteps stopped as suddenly as they had started, leaving only the oppressive silence in their wake. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. It was probably one of the other guests, he reasoned. Maybe someone else had decided to explore the house at night, but as he stood there, straining to hear any further movement, he was met only with silence. Feeling uneasy, Daniel decided to head back upstairs to his room. As he climbed the stairs, he kept his flashlight trained ahead, half expecting to see someone or something at the top. But when he reached the second floor, the hallway was empty. The sense of unease that had gripped him downstairs seemed to intensify up here. The air was colder, and the darkness seemed thicker, more impenetrable. As Daniel made his way toward his room, he passed by the guest room where Abby Borden had been murdered. He paused outside the door, feeling an almost magnetic pull toward it. His curiosity got the better of him, and he gently pushed the door open. The room was dark, but the faint glow from his flashlight revealed the bed, neatly made, and the heavy wardrobe in the corner. Everything was as it had been during the tour earlier that day. But now, in the stillness of the night, the room felt different. It felt wrong. Daniel stepped inside, his footsteps barely making a sound on the old wooden floor. He walked slowly toward the bed, where Abby had been found face down after being struck multiple times with an axe. He stood at the foot of the bed, imagining the horror that must have taken place there. Then, without warning, the room seemed to grow colder, as if an icy wind had blown through the house. Daniel shivered, instinctively wrapping his arms around himself. And then he heard it, a whisper, soft, almost like a breath, but unmistakable. It came from right beside him. Daniel's heart raced as he turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the room. But there was no one there, just the empty room, the darkness, and the silence. He tried to tell himself it was his imagination, that the house was just playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The whisper came again, this time closer, as if someone was standing right behind him. Daniel spun around, his flashlight flickering as he did, but the room was still empty. His breathing quickened as he backed toward the door, his mind racing. Something was in the room with him. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. The cold, the silence, the weight of unseen eyes watching him. It was overwhelming. Without another second's hesitation, Daniel bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind him. He raced down the hallway, back to his own room, his heart pounding in his chest. Once inside, he locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to catch his breath. The house was silent again, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a constant, suffocating presence. Daniel spent the rest of the night sitting up, unable to sleep, his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The next morning, as he packed his things and prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house had left its mark on him. Whatever haunted the Lizzie Borden house wasn't finished with him yet. As he drove away, Daniel reflected on the night's events. He had come to the house searching for answers, for a glimpse into the past. But what he found was far more terrifying than anything he could have imagined. The silence of the Bordens wasn't just a memory. It was alive, lingering in the very walls of the house, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor to cross its threshold. Story 2. Andrea and Miguel had always been adventurous travelers, seeking out unique destinations with rich histories. When they planned a weekend getaway to Flagstaff, Arizona, they stumbled upon the Hotel Monte Vista, a charming yet infamous historic hotel known for its ghostly reputation. The old brick building, with its vintage neon sign flickering at night, had a storied past. Legendary as a haunt for travelers, celebrities, and, allegedly, spirits. Andrea had read a few online reviews that mentioned strange occurrences at the hotel, but she and Miguel brushed them off as marketing ploys to attract curious tourists. When they checked into their room on the third floor, they were greeted by the creaky floors and dim lighting typical of an old establishment. The staff was friendly, but even they had a peculiar, knowing air about them when speaking about the hotel's history. Miguel had joked about the hotel being haunted, saying, "Maybe we'll meet a ghost tonight." Andrea laughed along, but as they settled into their room, an uneasy feeling began to creep in. Their room was simple, adorned with antique furniture and old photographs of Flagstaff's early days. A large mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed, and although it was just a reflection, it seemed to add to the room's unsettling atmosphere. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room, and Andrea couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were a little too long, that they lingered just a moment too long after the light shifted. That evening, they decided to have dinner at a local restaurant. As they walked through the hotel's narrow hallways, they passed framed articles recounting the Monte Vista's haunted history. Stories of long-dead guests who refused to leave, including the infamous phantom bellboy who knocked on doors late at night. Miguel found the stories amusing, while Andrea, though trying to remain skeptical, felt a chill run down her spine as she read each tale. After dinner, they returned to their room, the hotel quieter than before, with only the soft hum of distant conversations from other rooms. Andrea and Miguel decided to watch a movie before going to bed, hoping to relax after a day of sightseeing. The night began uneventfully, with the two of them laughing and talking as they enjoyed their time together. However, things quickly took a strange turn. As they lay in bed watching the screen, the lights in their room flickered. It was brief at first, just a subtle dimming, but enough to make Andrea glance at Miguel, who shrugged it off. "Old buildings, old wiring," he muttered, trying to reassure her. But as the night wore on, the flickering became more pronounced, each instance lasting longer than the last. At one point, the lights dimmed entirely, leaving the room in near darkness for several seconds before they surged back to life. "Okay, that's weird," Miguel admitted, sitting up. He reached for the bedside lamp, turning it on for extra light. The room seemed calm again, and they tried to return to their movie. But moments later, both Andrea and Miguel froze when they heard a faint sound in the hallway, something that sent shivers down their spines. It was the sound of a child's laughter, light, innocent, but echoing in a way that felt out of place in the old, quiet hotel. Andrea glanced at the door, her heartbeat quickening. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Miguel nodded, his face serious now. He stood up, walked to the door, and cracked it open. The hallway outside was empty. The soft carpeting muffled any sound of footsteps, and the long corridor stretched out in both directions, dimly lit by flickering sconces. There was no sign of a child or anyone. Miguel closed the door, locking it this time. "Probably another guest," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Andrea wasn't so sure. They returned to bed, but the atmosphere had shifted. The room felt colder, and the sense of unease that had been lurking at the back of Andrea's mind was now impossible to ignore. A few hours later, in the middle of the night, Andrea woke with a start. The room was dark, and for a moment, she wasn't sure what had pulled her from sleep. Then she noticed Miguel wasn't beside her. Sitting up, she saw him standing by the bathroom door, staring into the mirror. His back was to her, and his posture was unnervingly still. "Miguel," she called out softly, her voice shaky. He didn't respond right away, and when he did, it was in a low, distant tone. "There's someone standing behind us," he said, his eyes locked on the mirror. Andrea's blood ran cold. Her heart raced as she scanned the dark room, her gaze quickly shifting between the mirror and the empty space behind them. There was no one there. She jumped out of bed, rushing over to Miguel, grabbing his arm. "There's no one here," she insisted, her voice trembling. But Miguel didn't move. He continued staring into the mirror, his breathing shallow. "I saw them," he whispered, finally turning to look at her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "They were right behind us, just standing there." Andrea felt her skin prickle with fear. She turned off the bathroom light and led Miguel back to the bed. They both tried to settle down, but sleep was impossible. The room felt oppressive, the air heavy as if it were thick with unseen presences. They lay there in silence, their hearts pounding, when suddenly A soft crackle filled the air. It was the sound of an old radio turning on, faint static buzzing through the quiet. Andrea shot up, scanning the room for the source of the sound, but there was no radio. It was coming from somewhere else in the hotel, but they couldn't place where. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably from above their room. The ceiling creaked as if someone or something was pacing back and forth. Miguel sat up, his face drained of color. "There's no one staying above us," he whispered. Andrea's stomach dropped. They had asked about their floor earlier, and the staff had mentioned that the floor above theirs was closed for renovations. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. The pacing continued, each step heavier than the last, until it abruptly stopped. Silence followed, the kind of silence that rings in your ears, deafening in its stillness. Andrea and Miguel didn't dare move for the rest of the night, lying awake, waiting for the next inexplicable noise, the next unexplainable event. When the morning light finally crept through the curtains, they wasted no time packing their bags. They checked out earlier than planned, avoiding eye contact with the staff who gave them polite, knowing smiles as they handed in their keys. It was as if they had seen this many times before, guests unnerved by things they couldn't understand. As Andrea and Miguel drove away from the Monte Vista, they tried to rationalize the night's events. Maybe it was just their imagination, fueled by the hotel's haunted reputation. Maybe the old building's quirks had gotten the better of them. But deep down, they both knew the truth. Something had been there with them, something unseen but undeniably present. As they reflected on their experience, Andrea realized that certain places, like the Monte Vista, seemed to have a life of their own. These places didn't just hold history. They held on to the energies of those who had once passed through, never quite letting go. The echoes of those who had lived and died in the Monte Vista still lingered in its halls, playing with the minds of those who dared to stay. As we reflect on the chilling experiences in the Lizzie Borden House and the Monte Vista Hotel, it becomes clear that these places are far more than just historical landmarks. They seem to serve as portals, connecting us to something beyond the realm of reality, where the paranormal intertwines with the tragic events of the past. The energy in these spaces feels alive, as if the spirits of those who once walked their halls still linger, waiting for their stories to be told. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced anything strange or unexplained in a haunted place? Share your own ghostly encounters in the comments below, and let us know how these stories made you feel. Thank you once again to all of our amazing subscribers for your continued support. We couldn't do this without you. Stay tuned for more terrifying tales and haunted locations in our upcoming episodes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time as we explore more of the world's most haunted places.